Okay, yesterday we had started with the last unit of your syllabus, which deals with three financial services: banking, credit rating, and housing finance. Under that, we had started with the banking service. And in the banking service, we discussed what is the role of banking in economic development of a country, along with what are the different types of banks categorized under scheduled, unscheduled banks, and further categorization of scheduled banks into private sector banks, public sector banks, foreign banks, as well as regional rural banks. Now, we went into the detail of what is the difference between a commercial bank and a development bank, with the first and foremost difference being that commercial banks operate for profit while development banks actually target certain areas of the economy and work for the development of those areas. So they are actually working in national interest as against personal interest. Also, normal banks, your commercial banks are creating credit in the economy. They are accepting deposits, giving out loans, providing you check facilities, while your development banks are only giving financial assistance, that is giving financial aid or loans, but they are not accepting deposits, and it is because of this that there is no credit creation by development banks. After that, the next topic under banking is universal banking. Now, universal banking, universe, so bank offering a universe of services. That is what universal banking means. So we are moving beyond the traditional function of banking, and we are offering more extended services like selling mutual funds, merchant banking, factoring, credit cards, insurance, housing finance. So a number of activities are being provided at one stop, and that bank is known as a universal bank. So umbrella of services being offered by a single bank, that bank is termed as a universal bank. So what happens is that this facilitates the customer who, along with the normal banking functions, can actually avail a number of services through the same branch or through the same bank. So in the second last point, you see that universal banking is actually a combination of commercial banking, investment banking, and various other activities, including insurance. So loans, deposits, they are a part and parcel of commercial banking. Along with that, investment banking services are provided. You need portfolio assistance, portfolio management, investment suggestions. If you are a corporate, you need suggestions as to what should be the various avenues of raising funds. Should my firm go for an IPO? Or if you have already had an IPO in the past, should we go for a further follow on offer in the market? Is this the right time to issue debt, to raise debt from the market, and so on? There are number of suggestions or personalized services which are offered by investment bankers. Should we go for merger or acquisition of some other firm in the market? And well, such services, such personalized professional services are being provided by the same commercial bank. So in India, ICICI was the first commercial bank which got the tag of universal bank. So, what are the advantages of universal banking? First and foremost, they have the investors' trust. Now, investors trust in the sense that there are customers who are already availing the normal commercial banking services. And now, because they have been associated with the bank for long, it is easier for the bank to sell them extra services like insurance, credit card, home loan, retail loan, etc. Second advantage is economies of scale. So in economics, you people have already done this term a number of times, that as we expand the scale of operation, the per unit cost falls. The same thing is with universal banks also. As they offer more and more services, their scale of operation is expanding while the per unit cost of the services offered by them is falling. So they are enjoying economies of scale with lower cost, higher output, and better products being offered. Third is resource utilization. Now, resource utilization, we are talking about the client's resources. Now, since the bank is already well versed with the risk profile and risk taking capacity of the customer, they know to what extent and what kind of services can be offered to that customer. So, there's an example in this point, that say for example your bank is selling mutual funds, you know the risk profile of the customer, you can accordingly offer the type or the scheme of mutual fund to the customer. So if you see that okay, this customer is ready to take a lot of risk, say this you have seen as per the loans taken by the customer, credit taken by the customer in the past. So credit history of the customer shows that he or she has frequently taken loans and has also repaid them on time. So this is a sound customer. We can offer mutual funds. Keeping in mind the risk appetite of the customer, we offer him equity oriented scheme. So this is how resource utilization to the max can be done by a universal bank. Then the next point is profitable diversification. So you are diversifying your business, your profile into various different activities, and this is increasing the revenue generation for the bank. Easy marketing. So easy marketing, again, all of us know, you approach a bank, you are going there for your normal withdrawal of say some deposit, and they will tell you about the number of schemes they are offering, the kind of insurance policies they are offering, or they'll ask you to purchase some mutual funds, go for some investment scheme. So for the employee who's already sitting in the branch, selling these products to the existing customers becomes easier. And same ways for the counterparty, for the customer, this is a one-stop shopping. So you are going to the bank, you are getting normal services, and you are also getting personalized services. So it becomes convenient for the customer also. So these are some of the advantages of universal banking. Now, obviously, with advantages come various disadvantages also. The first and foremost problem with universal banking is that due to the vast number of services offered, there are different rules and regulatory bodies who keep a check on the bank. So, for example, normal banking services, they are being regulated by RBI. There, the bank is answerable to RBI. But when you're selling mutual funds, there the regulator is AMFI, Association of Mutual Funds of India. When you're selling insurance, the regulator is IRDA. So you have number of regulatory bodies who are keeping a check, and where rules and regulations prescribed by them, need to be followed by the bank. Next is effect of failure on banking system. Now, Universal Bank itself is a very big institution. And if an institution like this fails, then this will have a ripple effect, a domino effect on the economy. So, just to explain this to you, uh, under investment, we did two types of risk. Can anyone recall that? What are the two types of risk? जब रिस्क और रिटर्न का हमने मीनिंग करा था, तो जब हम इन्वेस्टमेंट स्टार्ट करते हैं, वी से देयर आर टू टाइप्स ऑफ रिस्क. Risk can be categorized under two classifications. Yes, absolutely right. So there is a systematic risk and there is an unsystematic risk. So what was systematic risk? Please, any one of you unmute yourself and answer. What was systematic risk? Should I ask then? Yes, Guncha, what was systematic risk? Guncha, are you here? Calculated. So what do we mean by calculated risk? I didn't get you. Piyush, आप बताओ what is systematic risk?
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Ma'am, systematic risk is basically the risk which we can estimate, like some say government policies which can be estimated. But the unsystematic risk, on the other hand, some risks which cannot be estimated, like the labor strike or something like that.
तो ये तो मीनिंग मुझे क्लियर नहीं हुआ, क्योंकि इन्वेस्टमेंट के पर्सपेक्टिव से एस्टिमेशन तो to some extent you can make of both the risk. Yes, Muskan, I think you are closer to the answer. So, uh,
Systematic risk
yes,
would be something that's not controllable by the company,
yes,
such as the
absolutely.
government policies, etc.
Yes,
That's out of scope of the business.
yes, very
Systematic
good.
risk will be what they can control, such as labor strikes, which are within the control of the company.
The company, yes, very good. So, basic difference between systematic and unsystematic risk is that your systematic risk is a non-diversifiable risk. So this is something which is beyond the control of a company, of an individual investor, because this is common to all the firms, to all the industries. So your government policies are change in government policies would be a systematic risk, while unsystematic risk is a diversifiable risk, in the sense that an investor can avoid this risk by not investing in the company which is facing a risk of, say, labor strike or breakdown, disruption in production, and so on. Or if you find that a company is having a lot of debt, so there might be some crisis situation, so I can avoid investing in such a company. So that would be the example of an unsystematic risk. Now, systematic risk, and there's another term which is known as systemic risk. So while systematic risk is a non-diversifiable risk, systemic risk is the risk of one organization failing and leading to a domino effect in the economy. In the sense that because of the stature of that organization, it will create a problem, it will lead to some bad effects for other organizations in the economy, and it will basically have a negative effect on the entire financial system. So if you remember way back in 2008, we have already had many presentations on subprime crisis, Actually, the trigger point for the start of the crisis was the failure of Lehman Brothers. So, Lehman Brothers itself was such a big organization that when it failed and when the government did not take steps to actually bail out the organization, it led to a ripple effect in the economy and subsequent failure, subsequent filing of bankruptcy by many other organizations. So, if a universal bank fails, then that will also have a negative impact on not only on the entire banking system but on the entire financial system also. Apart from that, the next disadvantage of a universal bank would be monopoly. So, because of the size of the universal bank, the kind of customer base they have, the influence they might use this influence in a negative manner to say hike the cost of services which are being rendered by them. And last point of disadvantage would be conflict of interest. Now, because of so many services being provided, there is always a possibility that the normal banking services might be disrupted, might be ignored at the cost of offering specialized services. Okay, so if I talk about examples today, almost every bank, good public sector or private sector bank, is actually working as an universal bank. Okay, moving further. Now, this is a new model of banking known as payment banks. So, almost all of us are using one or the other payment bank. So, this is actually the new licenses which have been given under the banking regime have been given to the payment banks. Uh, Being started by Airtel Payment Bank. Now, these banks can accept a restricted deposit and which is currently limited to 1 lakh rupees per customer. Now they can also issue loans and credit cards, and they can also offer current account and savings account facility to their customers. Some of the examples of payment banks are listed on the slide. Next topic under banking is mergers and acquisitions. So mergers and acquisitions is basically M&A, with the term which we use is basically a strategy used by a corporate to go for a restructuring to enhance the economic efficiency of the organization. So what do they do actually is that they look for other organizations with whom they can merge, or a bigger organization can acquire a smaller organization. Now, obviously, all this is being done with the purpose of improving the economic and financial efficiency of operations of the organization. Now, we say that there is a synergy effect due to a merger taking place. Synergy effect is that the combined efficiency of the merged organization will be more than the individual sum total of the organizations. तो दो फर्म्स है ए एंड बी जो इंडिविजुअली वो ऑपरेट कर रही हैं, जो उनकी एफिशिएंसी है उसका सम टोटल would be lower than the combined efficiency with which they can work post the merger. So this is known as synergy effect. 2 plus 2 will give you 5 if you are going for a successful merger. So in the banking sector, because specifically banking M&As have certain motives. First and foremost is growth. So you are able to expand your market, you are able to expand your customer base post the merger in the banking sector. Synergy effect I have already explained you. Then managerial efficiency. Now this is again one of the motives of going for a merger in the banking sector. Then there can also be strategic motives. Strategic motives is that you can have a vertical integration or a horizontal integration of services through the merger. You can enter into new markets, then tax shield and financial safeguard. The loss of one bank can be written off against the profits earned by the other bank, and that can lead to a reduction in tax liability also. Now, with these motives, banks enter into mergers, and some of the major mergers over the years they are given on your screens. Now, these subsidiaries, associates of State Bank of India have merged with the principal organization. If I talk about the latest mergers, then these are the biggest mergers which have taken place in the last 2 years in the public sector domain. And you see that the government has merged these banks with the objective of increasing their market strength and improving their efficiency of operations. The government is also planning, as announced in the current budget, that they will be going for privatization of more banks in the coming fiscal, which starts today, and that led to a number of strikes by the public sector bank employees also. So again, these are some more examples. Okay, then we come to NPAs. Yesterday, we talked about NPA being the first and foremost challenge before the banking sector, and that the NPAs in this year are expected to increase to 13.5%. So we are looking ahead to a future where we'll be seeing more defaults by the customers and more non-performing assets by the banks. So what are non-performing assets? The fourth point gives you the definition. These are the loans on which interest or installment of principal remains overdue for a period of more than 90 days. For agricultural loans, the definition is different here. The interest or principal payment has not been paid, has been overdue for 2 crop seasons. Then that is known as an NPA and the agricultural sector. Now, these are some of the news articles which are highlighting statements from news articles which have highlighted the problem of gross NPAs over the years. If we come to classification of NPAs, the non-performing asset where the customer has not made the payment and that payment has been overdue for 90 days, that is categorized as a special mention account. After that, for 12 months, that special mention account is kept under observation, and if during that period also the loan installment or principal amount remains unpaid, it is then categorized as a substandard asset. Again, 1 year is given. If that loan remains outstanding, it becomes a doubtful debt, and post that it is declared as a loss asset. Now, these are accounting entries made, and it is only post declaration of the outstanding loan as a loss asset that it is removed from the books of accounts. So there's an example, hypothetical example here, where as per the duration, how the NPA has been categorized has been given. You can have a look at the example. Okay, so this example is showing you how various classifications move in order from the loan being declared as a substandard asset to finally being declared as a loss asset on the balance sheet of the bank. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll stop here. I'll take up the topic of